The year is 1986. The Famicom will see major releases that will eventually become big franchises, from The Legend of Zelda, Castlevania, and Metroid. But there was one game that not only became a big franchise in Japan, but would birth a major genre. Dragon Quest, released by the NX Corporation. This was the creation of both Yuji Horii and Koichi Nakamura, essentially based off Western role-playing games like Wizardry and Ultima. Yuji Horii wanted to bring the role-playing experience to the home console market, seeing how nothing like this has been attempted before. NX on their part would bring in big names that were well-known in Japan to help bring appeal to this game. Well-known mangaka Akira Toriyama was brought in to do the characters and monster designs for the game. Composing legend Koichi Sugiyama worked on the music, and eventually one of Japan's largest publications, Shueisha, via their Shonen Jump magazines, helped NX promote the game. So while Dragon Quest was not an overnight success, word of mouth and promotion helped bring this game to well over 1 million copies in Japan. 3 years later, in 1989, Nintendo would bring the game over to North America under the title of Dragon Warrior. Though that was mostly just because another company known as Simulation Publications already owning the trademark to Dragon Quest, though their trademark had it all under one word. Weird, isn't it? Besides the point. Hoping to emulate the success that Dragon Quest saw in Japan, Nintendo would produce millions upon millions of copies, alongside reworking the game to have more modern features, and also having a huge marketing campaign for the game. But at the end of the day, sales went below expectations to the point where Nintendo America would do a special promotion of giving away the game for free whenever a person subscribed to Nintendo Power. But though, if you ask me, I personally think that Nintendo took it the wrong way of promoting Dragon Quest in the West. And it's mostly the art. When you compare and contrast, Nintendo went for this more medieval style art style compared to the more anime art style. And while I find the medieval art fine, it's still kind of boring when you compare it to Toriyama's artwork. It kind of catches your eye and gives you that punch you need to let you try out the game itself. And over the years, Dragon Quest for the past 35 years, kind of crazy how it's been 35 years, has been one of the biggest franchises for Square Enix. Right up there with Final Fantasy. While in Japan it's definitely been a big franchise, here in North America there's more of a niche following here, which has been growing, mostly thanks to the likes of games like Dragon Quest XI, and spin-off series like Dragon Quest Builders, and mobile games like Dragon Quest Tact. But at the end of the day, the Dragon Quest community in the West is still relatively small, and hell, we have some brand new games coming out through the horizon that seem to be very promising. Needless to say, Dragon Quest is still going strong, even to this day. And you know what? The crazy thing about Dragon Quest is that I never really grew up with Dragon Quest. And that's just mostly just because when it comes down to it, Dragon Quest wasn't really promoted that well here in the West, so I wasn't aware of it. So if I was playing any JRPG, it was either Pokemon, Final Fantasy, or the Mario RPG game from Paper Mario or Mario and Luigi. But my faintest memory of Dragon Quest is around 2009, 2010, I'm not exactly sure on the time, where I saw Dragon Quest IX being promoted on the Nintendo E3 page, and I never really gave it much thought. And when I was at a store and Dragon Quest IX was up there on the store shelves, I saw Bowser's Inside Story right next to it, and I picked that one instead. And I had a fun time with that game. And I never really gave much thought about Dragon Quest until like 2013 or 2014, where I heard people on the internet talk about Dragon Quest, and I was somewhat interested, and around that time, Dragon Quest IV came out on mobile devices. So I went on to try that game out and dropped it. Not exactly sure why, but I don't know. At the time I didn't really find it that interesting, but I also had college at that time, where I had a lot of things in my mind. But once again, I didn't think too much about Dragon Quest until 2016 when Dragon Quest Builders came out on PlayStation 4. And I decided to go on impulse buy that game, and that game really hooked me. I really loved that game. Not sure why a spin-off got me interested, but it was absolutely amazing playing that game. And then of course I went on and tried Dragon Quest 1 on mobile devices. That was okay, and I'll speak more on that when we talk about the review. And I tried Dragon Quest 4 again, and I really had a fun time. And then Dragon Quest 11 came out, and I played that, and the rest is history. I played through the rest of the other Dragon Quest games, and yeah, I can't believe I missed out on this franchise. But like I said, that's probably mostly just because of promotion here in the West. The franchise was barely promoted until Dragon Quest 9, in all honesty. So yeah, I'm much more of a recent Dragon Quest fan. That's now has a lot of knowledge about this franchise in a short span of time. Kind of crazy when you think about it. And just as long as Square Enix doesn't do any dumb shit like what Sega did with Sonic and what the Pokemon company has done with Pokemon, I'll probably be sticking high and through with the Dragon Quest franchise, seeing how the franchise has proven to release quality products. But hey, it's enough reminiscing, looking back, and looking at the future of this franchise. We need to finally talk about Dragon Quest 1 because there's multiple versions we need to go through, from the NES version, the Super Famicom remake, the Game Boy version, to the mobile version, and hell, we're going to throw the Switch version as well for a little compare and contrast. Yeah, a lot of versions to talk about for Dragon Quest 1. So, without further ado, let's finally get started by talking about the plot. "100 years ago, a legendary hero known as Erdrick defeated the Dragonlord and brought peace across the land of Alfgard. Now, 100 years later, the Dragonlord has returned and has stolen the Sphere of Light, along with the princess of Tantagel Castle, Gwaelin. Now, the descendant of Erdrick, otherwise known as the Scion of Erdrick, is now tasked to save the world like his ancestor once did." And yeah, that's the plot to Dragon Quest 1. Pretty simplistic when you think about it. But you know what? I'm actually going to go out and defend the plot of Dragon Quest 1 and the fact that it's very simplistic. So hear me out on this. The first thing I want to talk about is the fact that seeing how Dragon Quest was one of the very first JRPGs available for the Famicom, it was pretty obvious that Enix and Chunsoft did not want to overcate the plot with all this lore and all. They wanted to keep things relatively simple, so they had a simple backstory of a legendary hero defeating the evil one, and now you, the descendant of that hero, need to go on and do the same. And number two of my defense. When you compare this to other games during this time, most of these games don't really have a wall scroll that tells you the story during the menu, or they'll just leave the story in the manual. Dragon Quest does it different. At the start of the game, the king tells you exactly what's going on in the game. And when you talk to townspeople, you learn more about what you need to do in your quest to go out and defeat the Dragonlord. So in many ways, the game is integrating the plot as you progress through the game. In many ways, you can consider it revolutionary. But now it's time to talk about the gameplay and the overall progression. At the start of the game, of course, you start off in Tantagel Castle in front of King Gloric. Like I said, he tells you about what you need to do, and then he sets you off. So the first thing you'll notice is that everything is presented in an overhead view. The most similar comparison would be The Legend of Zelda, if there was a comparison to be made. But the first thing you'll realize is that this game does not play like The Legend of Zelda, seeing how when you start interacting with things, this thing pops up, the command menu. It has multiple commands, from allowing you to talk to people, using your stats, opening doors, taking items, and going downstairs manually. And yes, I did just say that. You have to go down the stairs manually. Anyways, as King Lark sets you off, you'll find 3 treasures that he has given you to help you on your quest. When taking these 3 treasures, you find some gold, which is literal child's play compared to the stuff you'll have at endgame, a torch, and a magic key to help you open the door behind you. And that's one thing to point out. Any door that you find in this game needs to be opened with a magic key, which at this moment in time, you don't know where to find. And now off you go on your quest. When leaving Castle Tantagel, you'll find 2 points of interest. Down south is a castle, and to your right is a town. And of course you can't really reach the castle right now, so let's head into the town. So heading to the town, you see a man right in front, and when talking to him, he introduces you to the town of Brookenary. And Brookenary is kind of like a tutorial town or a starting town, where when you talk to certain townspeople, they'll tell you exactly what certain things do in the town, and certain key points. One is an armor shop, where you can buy weapons and armor. The second is an inn, where you can go and rest up. The third is an item shop, where you can buy certain items. Well, the item shop currently only has herb, a torch, and dragon scale. Though the dragon scale can be pretty useful because it can help increase your defense by a little bit, but it's enough because one thing of course is that we need to get prepared up and buy some weapons in the armor shop. And when buying weapons and armor, there are 3 categories to look at: the weapons, the armor, and the shield. The latter 2 of course increases your defense, and the later was weapons increases your strength. So yeah, definitely a good idea to go out and suit up a bit, but of course with the paltry amount the king gives you, yeah, you're not really getting much. And you should go out and talk to some of the townsfolks. Why? Because they can actually give you some hints. And that kind of gets into my one point I want to bring up. Is Dragon Quest a guide game? Because of course at this time during NES games that were adventure style, some of them are very fast and big, but they didn't really give you much direction, so you were going to be lost for sure. But in Dragon Quest, as long as you're talking to the townsfolk, they can actually point you in the right direction and you don't feel as lost. It's kind of like asking for directions. If you're in an unknown area, of course you're going to talk to someone who is more familiar to point you in the right direction. At the end of the day, it's just really common sense. But there is one outside source that might be more helpful. A map, because Dragon Quest 1 does not have an in-game map. Essentially meaning, even though some people can give you some good directions of where to go next, it's kind of hard when you don't really have a map to essentially point you to that right direction. And Nintendo of America was fully aware about the fact that there was no in-game map in Dragon Warrior, because anyone who got Dragon Warrior had a fully detailed map that they can see. And of course Nintendo Power also had a map as well. So it was obvious that Nintendo knew that people were going to get lost. In terms of the NES version, it is vital to get a map online. Anyways, when talking to some of the townsfolk, one of them will mention a town that sells magic keys, and another person will mention a town up in the northwest. So it should be a good enough time to go out and investigate. And exploring the world. Well, that just happened. Yep, in Dragon Quest 1 there are indeed random encounters that you go on and face. And there's 4 options to choose from. Using your physical attacks, using the command fight, using spells, which we don't have any spells right now, using items like herbs if you went on and bought some if you're low on health, or just simply running away from battle, which in some cases that's actually a good option to do. And when you win a battle, you gain gold and EXP. And trust me when I say this, as you progress through the game, you're going to be facing a whole host of monsters that are all designed by Akira Toriyama that have a unique look to each one of them. That I kind of like, in my personal opinion. Anyways, once you reach a certain amount of experience points, you'll be able to level up. Leveling up increases your health, magic points, strength, and agility. And in some cases, once you reach a certain level, you'll learn a new spell. So kind of important to go on and face monsters and leveling up and all, but we'll definitely talk about the grind later. Oh, we'll definitely talk about that grind. Heading up north, we'll notice a cave. And it should be a good idea to go out and explore that cave for a little bit. When entering into a cave, you'll notice one thing. It is dark, and we need some kind of light source to enter to this cave. And thankfully, King Lorik gave us a torch. So using the torch, it gets a little bit of limited range, but hey, it'll work out for now. And you'll notice one thing right away, that this cave is kind of designed like a maze. So we're kind of just going through this maze for a bit, and we'll notice a set of stairs. Heading up, we'll see another maze that we need to go through. And going through this one's a little easier. But at the end, we'll notice a treasure chest. And opening up the treasure chest contains a tablet written by Erdrick. As written by him, he tells us that he defeated the Great Evil with 3 items. After he defeated the Great Evil one, he left those 3 items in the trust of 3 keepers that their descendants will protect was their every whim. And now, if evil were to return, us, the descendant, must go out and find those 3 items. So yeah, this is essentially a fetch quest to go out and find these 3 particular items, talk to people for clues, to go out and eventually defeat the Dragonlord. So now, let's go out and continue on our quest to go up to the town of Gallaham. And when entering this town, not that many people say much other than welcome to Gallaham, but one person mentions that the princess has been taken eastward, and we should be looking towards the east to find more clues. So it would be a good idea to go over to the east. But there's one major blockade. Now is a good time to talk about that grind I mentioned earlier when it comes down to leveling up. Because when you look at the amount of EXP you gain from fighting monsters, even later ones, it is very paltry. And you know what that means? It essentially means you're going to be grinding a lot. Even in the later levels, as you'll notice, it gets higher and higher and higher. The amount of EXP you need to get to the next level. And hell, if you look at that chart, yeah, it gets exponentially higher, and it's going to be a long grind to go to the next level. Essentially what you're doing in each new area is essentially grinding your ass off facing the new enemies, hoping you don't get your ass kicked, and then you just heal up in the end, and then you go back and do it all over again. But in some cases you are going to die from enemies, and when you die from enemies you get sent back to Tantagel Castle, the king scolding you, and you lose half your gold. And that's another thing to worry about, is gold, because of course you need to go buy new weapons and armor just so you're safe against fighting new enemies. So it's this process of lather, essentially going on grinding, rinse, resting up in and in, or buying new weapons or armor, and repeat, doing it all over again, over and over and over again. So yeah, it is definitely a bit of a slog. And let's talk about the other thing that we need to talk about, which is King Lorik. Every time you come back to the castle, the king is the only source that will let you save your game, and one of the sources that tells you how much EXP you need to gain to the next level. So if you're not following a chart and you're not sure exactly when you're going to reach that next level, you're going to haul ass back to the king and ask him when you're going to level up to the next level. And of course there's ways of getting back to the castle quicker. One of them is the item known as Wings, which you don't get until you get to the next town we're going to be talking about soon. And the other is the spell Return, which you don't get until much later. So in the early game, it's essentially hauling ass back, talking to the king just to find out, or just using an EXP guide. And it could get a little annoying because, number one, seeing as he's the only source, you can't really just stick around one area unless you leave your console on. So by then, after you're done grinding, which I recommend level 6 or 7, you're ready to head over to Eastward. And by then you will already learn the spells of Heal and Hurt. Heal is self-explanatory, it does heal you. Hurt goes on and hurt the enemies. And yeah, this name does give me hurt. So heading eastward, we actually find a town. And it should be good to go into this town and talk to some of the townsfolk. Once again, we do need to know more information of where to go next. So talking to some of the townsfolk, we can get 3 things out of this. One of them, there's a man that lives up north, so it might be a good place to go check out. Another is that golems fall asleep through the power of fairies. Don't know exactly what that means, but it might be useful against a certain enemy that we'll face. And finally, there's a man that brings up a town known as Rimodar. And when we ask him what this town is, this is a town that actually sells magic keys. So that's one of the clues taken care of. We actually now found an area that actually sells the thing that we're looking for, magic keys. And also on top of that, this place also has a weapon shop that actually sells some decent weapons. So we have a couple of areas to go. A place up north and Rimodar, which is where we can find the magic keys. But first, heading up north and meeting this man up in the North Shrine, this man has what is known as the Staff of Rain. But he won't give it to you because he wants to test you, because he knows that you are the descendant of Erdrick and he wants to see your strength. So what he proposes is for you to find the Silver Harp, or the Lyre Ire in later translations. So be it, we can't get the Staff of Rain until we get the Silver Harp for this man here. And yep, the Staff of Rain is one of the items that Erdrick said that he left in the trust of the 3 keepers. So yeah, we had to find this harp first. Not before some grinding, seeing how the monsters here are definitely strong as hell, and the later monsters in Rimodar are also going to be strong. So after this grind, you'll learn the spells both Sleep and Radiant, because I at least recommend up to level 8 or 9. Sleep is kind of self-explanatory. It puts enemies to sleep, which actually is pretty useful because some enemies are very susceptible to this spell here, meaning it'll be just much more easier facing the enemies if you come in with the spell Sleep. And the spell Radiant lights up caves, and this is the other second source I was telling you guys about that will help you light up caves. It gets a much larger range, but though unfortunately it does gradually wear down over time, unlike the torch, which even though with its limited range, it still remains lit as long as you stay in the cave. So it's either or which one you choose. And it's a good thing you learned that spell Radiant, because down south there's a cave that we need to go through before heading down to Rimodar. And this is known as the Quagmire's Cave. It's one of the shortest caves out there. There's a little area to the right where there's a green dragon that can easily kick your ass if you're not prepared, so don't face him right away, even at this level. Your main goal is just to head down south until you see a set of stairs to go up, which will lead you to the area of Alfgard where Rimodar exists. And talking to the townsfolk, there's some points of interest we can deduct from talking to them. One of them, there's a shrine down south, which for now we don't need to go to just yet. Number 2, there's a man that finally sells magic keys, which you can only hold up to 6, which is a little bit unfortunate, but hey, it's good that we can finally buy magic keys for now, so we can finally open some doors. Third, there's a man that's behind a magic door. When talking to him, he mentions in the town of Cole, 4 steps below a bathhouse, there is a particular item you can get. And finally, there's a man that mentions if you haven't found the Stone of Sunlight yet, it's in Tantagel Castle. Yeah, some 3 points to go to. A shrine down south, which we don't need to go to just yet, an item we can find in the town of Cole, and finally the Stone of Sunlight that's in Tantagel Castle, which is the second item that Erdrick mentioned. So, places to be, not before some grinding, because these enemies are strong and Rimodar actually sells some pretty decent items. Mainly the magic armor, which heals you every 2 steps. It's expensive, but hey, I recommend doing that grind, because you definitely need to grind up some levels before you do everything else. So after that grind, which I recommend at least up to level 13 or 14, by then you'll learn the spell Stop Spell, Outside, and Return. Stop Spell stops the enemies from casting their spells, which is actually very useful, seeing how later enemies can cast spells, especially of the healing variety, meaning a good idea right there, you don't want the enemies to heal. Outside lets you escape from caves at any point, so meaning you don't need to haul ass back out of the caves. And finally, Return sends you back to the castle, which can actually be very useful once we get that sunstone. But first we need to head back to Cole, head 4 steps below the bathhouse, and get the item the man was talking about, which turns out to be a fairy flute, which might be that one thing that we're looking for to put golems to sleep, whatever that means still. But anyways, heading back to Tantagel Castle, we can finally go through those doors. There's some treasure chests in one of the doors, which quite honestly, there's not really much there. But opening the other door, we can actually talk to some of the folks there and talk to this guy who also sells magic keys. But keep in mind, doors will close again when you leave an area, so make sure you have some magic keys before thinking that you can go on and just buy magic keys right away. So if you don't have magic keys, you have to go back to Rimodar and buy magic keys again. But anyways, there's actually a stairway behind this door area, and when going down there, we actually see a man guarding a treasure, and when talking to him, he says, "Congratulations, take the item behind me." And when we get it, it's the Stone of Sunlight, or the Sunstone. So finally we have one of the items that Erdrick said they gave to some keepers. So that's one of the items taken care of. But when talking to some of the townsfolk behind that door I mentioned, one of them mentions a graveyard below the town of Galenholm. So might be a good idea to head back to Galenholm and open the door to the structure in Galenholm. So heading back to Galenholm and opening that door and talking to some of the people there, some people will mention a town known as Damdora, or Hogness in the original translation. That used to be a town that exists down the south, but they're not sure whether or not it still exists or not. So might be an interesting place to investigate. But we're interested in finding that graveyard. And finding this graveyard is kind of hard because the way how the game's set up, it's kind of hard to find that little area that you can go through to find the graveyard. I would recommend getting a map of Galenholm just so you're safe. But anyways, when you finally find it, you find a man that mentions a harp. Could be the silver harp, but the man mentions it's dangerous to go down there, but we're going to go down anywhere because we need to get that silver harp. But again, not before some grinding, which I at least recommend up to level 15. Just so you're strong enough to go through this cave, because the deeper you go down this cave, there are stronger enemies. And also by then you'll learn the spell Repel, which repels against enemies. Which means in the overworld or in caves, you only deal with enemies as long as they're weaker against you. So like I said, exploring the cave of Galenholm, there are going to be stronger enemies the deeper you go, and this is definitely the longer cave out of the bunch so far. There's multiple floors, probably up to 5 if I had to guess, and this is definitely designed like a maze. And you're definitely going to get lost on your first visit. So if you don't want to get lost, I would recommend getting a map at the very least. And besides the silver harp, there's some nice treasures you can get. But though there's a cursed item you can get here known as the curse belt. But fret not, you can sell that item in the item shop. But let's say you accidentally put it on and you get cursed, you won't be able to get back to the Castle Tantagel. They'll tell you to get out of here, cursed one. And the only way you can get uncursed is going to the Town of Brookenary and talking to this guy here who can remove cursed items. But anyways, when we go deeper down, we can finally get the silver harp, which is what we need of course. And if you actually use the silver harp, enemies will be attracted to the sound, so they'll come right after you. Which, if you're grinding, can be a little bit easier to do, but quite honestly, I prefer the back and forth, so I immediately gave the silver harp to the man to get the Staff of Rain, which is the second item we need. But now should be a good amount of time to talk about the graphics and the music of this game. The graphics for Dragon Quest 1, they're fine, nothing too mind-blowing. It's obvious when it comes down to the graphics on the NES. The NES can't really display that many colors all at once. And the color choices that Dragon Quest 1 has are pretty decent. You have nice green in the overworld, some gray and brown colors for some of the buildings in the towns, and each character model is either blue or maybe red. It's decent color choices. I wouldn't say they're great, as I would argue that there's better looking games on the NES. Just take a look at some of the stuff later on. But for what it is, they're fine. But it's really when you get into the caves and dungeons where things take a shit. The colors are drab, and the biggest thing for me is the frame rate. Well, generally Dragon Quest 1, I can somewhat tell runs at a pretty solid frame rate. If I had to guess, about 30 frames per second. But when you enter the caves and dungeons, everything just starts looking like a slideshow. I can't say exactly how much this game runs, as I really don't have any of those analysis tools and all, and I don't really have a sharp eye for that. But I can tell things are very jank, and it makes the caves look like an eyesore, and that's just not good in my book. And quickly talking about the sound effects and music, the sound effects are fine. They're nice and crunchy, as I like them for 8-bit sounds and all. While the music, yeah, it's not that good. Bearing a few songs, the town theme, the overture, and the ending credits, which I generally think these are really good songs, but everything else, they're ear-grating. The overworld theme bores me to sleep, and the sound font that they use for this one is not that great. The caves are just outright ear-grating, as there's different variants of this cave theme, and each one is just god-awful. And the battle theme, nothing too much to say. It just has this 5-second loop, and that's it. And speaking about loops, these songs literally loop about 5 to 10 seconds. So they get very repetitive. And I understand, when it comes down to Koichi Sugiyama is a master in his craft when it comes down to composing music. And I understand he was relatively rushed when working on the first Dragon Quest game, but when I hear bad music, I'm going to say it's bad music, regardless of how much time a person spent on working on the music. If it just doesn't sound good, it just doesn't sound good. But though, that's only really applicable to the NES version of these tracks, because when it comes down to later tracks, they're much better, especially the orchestrated stuff, as of course Sugiyama originally had them orchestrated in mind. And I can actually listen to the orchestrated tracks, which I'll link down below for you guys to take a listen to, and it's literally what you guys been hearing throughout this whole video. To quickly touch on this, let's talk about the localization. For whatever reason, Nintendo of America thought it was a good idea to have an Old English dialect for every character to speak in, so a lot of these and thous. And quite honestly, it's only really flavor text when you look at it, nothing more, nothing less. So heading down south, we actually find the town that they were mentioning, Gamdora, which is definitely ruined to shit once we enter in. And there are some strong enemies here that are pretty tough to deal with, so might be a good time to head on out. And we actually look at the map of Alfgard, there's a town that's in the south part of Alfgard. And heading down there and going through, we have to fight this golem, which can hurt as hell, which definitely might be a good idea to try to use that fairy flute. And lo and behold, the golem does fall asleep, which makes it easier, but do be careful when he wakes up, he immediately goes out and attacks. So anyways, once we defeat the golem, we can enter the town of Cantlin. And talking to these people, we can learn some few things about it. Number one, there exists a powerful armor known as Erdrick's armor, which is the armor that Erdrick wore against the Dragonlord. And the last person who had this armor was a man known as Win. And talking to another person would mention Win left the armor behind his item shop. Which, seeing how we haven't met a person known as Win anywhere, the only place that would be is the ruined town of Damdara, so we have to head over there. But first, not before some grinding, which at least level 17, because by then we'll learn the spell Heal More, which heals you a lot more compared to the spell Heal, because you'll be a little bit higher in terms of health, so definitely a good idea to have Heal More with you. Heading over to Damdara and going to the area where this item shop is, we're immediately attacked by Armor Garant, which is strong as hell, which is why I recommend the spell Heal More. And after hitting him a couple of times, we finally defeat him, and when we search on the ground, we find Erdrick's armor. It will replace the armor that you currently are wearing. And unlike the magic armor, which every 2 steps you heal, every 1 step with Erdrick armor you heal, and also you don't get hurt by the poison waters or these electric stuff that really hurts you like hell. And heading back to Catlin and talking to some of the townsfolk there, one person will mention a way to prove that you are indeed the Scion of Erdrick. And he's behind that whole electric area there, which is why it's important to get Erdrick's armor first. And when talking to him, he says in order to find the proof you need to be the Scion of Erdrick, you need to be 70 paces south and 40 paces east from Castle Tantagel to find the mark of Erdrick. But quite honestly, how the hell are you supposed to know 70 paces south and 40 paces east? There's nothing that really tells you exactly what, unless you do one particular side quest. There are 2 side things you can do in this game. One of them is exploring the Warrior's Cave. It's only 2 floors, and the most important thing that you can find here is the Warrior's Ring, which increases your strength by 2. But the more important thing is saving the Princess Gwendolyn, and yes, this is indeed a side quest here, and she can be found in Quagmire's Cave where you fight that green dragon. Do be prepared when facing the green dragon. I would at least recommend level 14 or level 15. You'll be strong enough to at least fight the green dragon and all. So when you defeat the green dragon, make sure you also have some magic keys because there will be a door that you need to go and open, and that's where the princess is. So when you talk to her, you rescue her, and you can take her back to the castle. And when you take her back, the king will be grateful, and Gwendolyn will give you her love, Gwendolyn's love. And when using this item in the overworld, she'll tell you how many EXP you need to level up, so that's the second source I was mentioning. And she'll tell you exactly how far are you from the castle, exactly how many steps you are north, east, south, and west. So yeah, this is the thing that you need to go out and find 70 paces south and 40 paces east from the castle. So when you do that, you'll finally find the Mark of Erdrick, and finally you can go down to the shrine south and talk to the man, seeing how you have both the Sunstone and the Staff of Rain, and now the Mark of Erdrick. So when talking to the man, he'll give you the Rainbow Drop, to which you will need to forge the Rainbow Bridge that'll bridge you to Sharlax's Castle. And Sharlax's Castle is one of the largest mazes in the game, the largest dungeon in the game as well, so do be prepared. And I also would recommend a map here as well, because there's literally an area in Sharlax's Castle that'll constantly loop, so that's definitely a thing to worry about. Also, this is the area where Erdrick's sword is, the strongest sword in the game. And people will mention that this is the sword that can cut through the Dragonlord. And Sharlax's Castle is home to some of the strongest enemies, so you still need to grind for a little bit. This is definitely the best place to grind. I grinded up to level 20, and by then I would learn the spell Hurt More. Man, that name. Which hurts the enemies more. Once you finally reach downstairs, you actually find the Dragonlord. And the Dragonlord actually gives you an offer. Join him, and he gives you half the world. And you actually say yes to his offer, that's where the game ends. The game will linger on the fact that he has finally won, and everything goes red. And you can't do anything afterwards, other than resetting your game. So meaning if you didn't save before then, yeah, this is where things end right here. But if you actually say no to his offer, then the battle against the Dragonlord begins. To which is not that bad of a fight. Quite honestly, I was only really able to beat him in 2 hits or so. And he may cast a spell here and there, but it's rare, so don't worry too much about it. But what you should be worried more about is his second form, because that one can actually hit a lot, and definitely has more health, because every time you attack this form, it only really does a little damage. So my recommendation is make sure you cast Heal More every once in a while if you go below 50 health, and you should be good, and you should be able to beat him down. Once you beat him, you obtain the Sphere of Light, and the light starts emanating throughout the whole land of Alfgard. You did it, you saved Alfgard. You could head back to the castle first, but you can also head over to towns and shrines that you've been previously and talk to the townsfolk there, because they're actually going to be celebrating that you defeated the Dragonlord. They don't say much, but hey, it's kind of nice to see people say something different now that you've saved the world for once. So returning to the castle of Tantagel, the king actually gives you his offer, have you be the ruler of Tantagel Castle, to which you actually deny, saying that if you want to rule, you want to find your own lands instead. And if you actually save the princess will come along with you, and you can't say no to her offer. But if you didn't save her, you go out by yourself to find new lands. Asshole. And the game finally ends. The soldiers toot their horns and the credits roll. I'll save my thoughts of how I feel about this game for later, because we have some other versions to take a look at. In 1993, 7 years after the original 1986 remake, a remake was made for the Super Famicom. Not only did Dragon Quest 1 receive a remake, but Dragon Quest 2 did, and they were bundled under the package of Dragon Quest 1 and 2, 2 games in 1 cart, which we're only taking a look at the first one for now. This would be the last game to be developed by Chunsoft, as they would move on to work on other games. And this would be a game that would be a Japanese only release, because at the time, NX of America wasn't really existing all too much. And the main focus for Dragon Quest 1 and 2 was to bring quality of life improvements to these 2 games, alongside additional changes as well. Did they actually went out their way to accomplish this? Well, we'll find out And like I said earlier, we're taking a look at a fan translation for this game here, seeing how we don't really have anything else to take a look at. So I won't be commenting too much on the translation here, but I will say that I'm kind of surprised that they actually went on and used the NES translated names. So let's talk about the changes here made to Dragon Quest 1 on the Super Famicom. Starting, of course, was the graphics, which of course much better from the NES version. You have a lot more colors, which is obvious seeing how the Super Famicom is known for displaying tons of color all at once. And you have some nice shadow effects in the town of Cole, where the trees are actually covering up some parts of the town itself, which is pretty nice to take a look at. But though, if you do compare Dragon Quest to other JRPGs on the Super Famicom, it is definitely not the best looking JRPG on the console. But compared to Dragon Quest 1, it's a nice step up when you're comparing both of them graphically. And another nice step up is of course the music, as of course when it comes down to the music here, Sugiyama actually went on his way to incorporate these full songs from the orchestrated versions into the game itself, alongside adding in brand new songs as well. When you enter the shrines that hold both the Staff of Rain and the Rainbow Drop, a brand new song was made specifically for those shrines. The main menu now has a song of its own called Intermezzo, which is pretty nice that Sugiyama actually went on his way to actually improve the music here in this remake. It's obvious that he knew that when it came down to the original NES release, the music wasn't really that great, so obviously improvements needed to be made. And good on him for doing just that. The next major change comes from the command system, as some changes have been made to the system here. While it mostly works the same, some things have been taken out in favor for a more automated system. For example, going downstairs, you no longer need to manually go down and select stairs just to go down. It does it automatically now, which is a nice touch in my book. I don't need to constantly click on stairs, which is kind of an annoyance when you think about it. One bigger change to me is the addition called Quick Command. This was introduced in Dragon Quest V of a simple press of a button, normally either the L button or the X button, will launch a quick command to where the game itself will determine what you're planning to do. If you're talking in front of an NPC, it'll actually talk to the NPCs. If you're going in front of a door, it'll actually open the door for you without needing to go into the menus. If you're looking for items, it does just that as well. This feature right here is much more convenient compared to just going through the menus and all. While that's still an option right there, there's also an alternative option as well, which is nice to see. And speaking about searching for items, you remember how in searching for items, you only really used it for about 2 items. Well, here, it's a lot more useful now because the game itself now adds in these drawers and pots that you actually can rummage through and actually find some items from chimera wings, so on and so forth. And hell, you can even find these new items called seeds. There's multiple of these seeds here that can either increase your life, increase your agility, and increase your strength. Definitely very nice items to have if you're not that close to leveling up, but you definitely need a little bit of a stat boost. Meaning that looking for items through drawers and what have you is definitely very encouraged. And on top of that, if we're talking about items and such and towns, they're actually a lot more cheaper compared to the NES version. About 3/4 cheaper compared to before, if I had to make an estimate. And on top of that, inns are also cheaper as well. And magic keys are sold at a cheaper price as well. The only thing that's maintained their price were weapons and armor, and that's it. Everything else is now a lot cheaper, which makes things a lot more convenient. And meaning that you don't need to grind as much if you are low on health and you need to rest up in an inn. And speaking about that grind, definitely this was another major quality of life change made to this game, as monsters will give you more EXP and more gold generally. And generally, based on my estimates, most monsters give you about double the EXP, but that's not always true, as not all monsters will give you double the amount. Some of them will give you even more. For example, the golem that you face in Catlin actually gives you a lot of EXP when you compare and contrast. It's pretty crazy. So yeah, overall, the grind is a lot more fairer now. You still have to grind a lot in this game, that's for sure, but not as much compared to the NES version. It's not going to be this ladder rinse repeat process that plagued the original release, and definitely feels a lot more faster, more fast paced. Brand new to this remake is a bank. In the town of Brickenary, you can actually go up to this person that's inside the inn, and she'll help you store in your gold and items. Quite honestly, I didn't really use this feature in the Super Famicom remake because I actually didn't know this existed in this remake here until a much later version that I actually went on and played for this review. But the way it works is that you store in your gold by the hundreds, and you can store in any item. And like I said, I didn't really use it here, but it was a lot more useful in a later playthrough I did with the later versions. I didn't necessarily use it for gold because, quite honestly, I was pretty smart at making sure not to die in my playthroughs. But for items, it's definitely a lot more useful because sometimes I'll fill up my inventory and I do need to store in some items when I needed to, and I didn't even really need certain items in the first place. NES. So yeah, the bank system is definitely a nice feature for those who definitely need a way to store in their money if they constantly die a lot, or they're just holding way too much crap and you need someone to store it. On top of that, weapons and armor receive a bit of a change. In the original game, when you bought a new weapon or armor, you had to sell the original one, no questions asked. While in this remake here, you can actually keep your old armor set, but quite honestly, you really don't need it. You can just sell it right away. And then you can just go on and equip the new one. It's a small change that's more akin to the later Dragon Quest games, but that's really about it. Some visual changes were made. For example, in Erdrick's Cave, rather than a chest that has a little scroll that lets you know Erdrick's plea to you, instead it's now a tombstone that Erdrick writes out to you. And also on top of that, when you find items like the Sunstone, the Staff of Rain, Erdrick's armor, they're actually now visualized in nice little sprites. And I kind of like that detail. And on top of that, when you go to Cragmire's Cave to face off the Green Dragon, you can actually see the Green Dragon guarding where Princess Gwendolyn lays, which is a pretty nice feature right there. I actually do like the fact that they actually now show you some visualization and all. Now the last one I want to bring up is Sharlax's Castle. Sharlax's Castle saw a bit of a small redesign if you actually compare and contrast the maps from the NES version to the Super Famicom version. And some stairs actually take you to different places now, so if you're familiar with these stair designs and the map design from Sharlax's Castle, yeah, you're going to be a little bit confused of where to go next because they slightly redesigned the area. And also when facing off the Dragonlord, if you actually agree to the Dragonlord's proposition of him giving you half the world, you actually wake up in the inn in Rimlandar and the innkeeper tells you how you had a nightmare. Yeah, it's no longer a soft lock when it comes down to agreeing to the Dragonlord now. Essentially, it's the developer's way of saying, yeah, you kind of fucked up, but we'll let you try again, because we're nice. But overall, these changes don't necessarily change Dragon Quest 1, but in all honesty, goes out and makes it more convenient. All the annoying things that surrounded Dragon Quest 1 either ironed out or made more convenient to do. And it's definitely a great way of playing Dragon Quest 1, and makes the original NES version less preferable to play. But we're not done here yet. We have two other versions to take a look at. Next up being the Game Boy Color. In 1999, NX released Dragon Quest 1 and 2 for the Game Boy Color. Much like the Super Famicom remake, this was pretty much bringing over these two games over to a brand new console, this time being the Game Boy. And this would be cross-compatible with both an old Game Boy, those black and white screens, and a Game Boy Color. And on top of this, the game would also be localized 1 year later under the title Dragon Warrior 1 and 2, with this weird looking ass box art that I don't know who thought this was a good idea to have this kind of rendered art right here. And yeah, NX in America started existing again. They were localizing Dragon Quest games still under the Dragon Warrior title. And these ports right here wouldn't be developed by Chunsoft, but instead by Tosei, which had a history of working with NX at this time. And finally, to quickly touch on the localization, seeing how this was an official product from NX, the localization is very similar to the Japanese release, alongside names and terminology as well, meaning that Erdrick was known as Lodo in this release, Gwendolyn was known as Laura, so on and so forth. Kind of weird, but it is what it is, I guess. Moving on to the game proper, most of the quality of life improvements from the Super Famicom remake are here, of course, except of course the graphical improvements, which makes sense seeing how we're dealing with 8-bit hardware again, this time on a handheld. And speaking on those graphics, when comparing them to the NES release, I actually do prefer the look of the Game Boy version over the NES release. It probably has to do with the color choices they made for this version here, and the fact that the sprite work is just much better. Developers have more and more years of perfecting sprite work. And hey, if you play this on Super Game Boy, you get these nice borders. Those are cool. And the music, you would think that Sugiyama would rest on his laurels and just port over the NES music, all that ear-grating shit, into the Game Boy version. No, not exactly. He actually reworked the music to make it sound better for chiptune. And I actually do prefer the Game Boy version here. It's definitely some great stuff. And the command system got a major rework here. The quick command system is now the default way of talking to NPCs, opening doors, and searching for items. While the command system has now been reduced to only 4 sections: casting your spells, checking your items, checking your stats, and some miscellaneous stuff in terms of menus and all. Definitely a very reduced role compared to the original NES release and the Super Famicom version. And personally, I think this is fine here. Even though the older option is now less and less, the newer option is just a better option overall, seeing how most other RPGs have this kind of system set up and all. And speaking about major redesigns, well, not so much. Towns also got some redesigns. Nothing too drastic, most of these designs are pretty much the same, but now buildings now have these stairs where people used to be, and those stairs will contain where the people were. And that's just mostly just because, as we know already, the Game Boy's resolution is definitely much smaller than the 240p of both the NES and Super NES. So yeah, compromises had to be made to essentially accommodate the smaller screen. So I wouldn't say Dragon Quest would be suffering that much from screen crunch, but the appreciation is there and the effort does pay off to see that the developers realize that they're working on a smaller screen. And in terms of the additions, we now have a brand new intro screen where we actually see the Dragonlord take the Sphere of Light, which is actually pretty nice, and the Green Dragon and the Dragonlord's henchman taking the princess. That's actually pretty cool right there. And in terms of other additions, we also have an expansion of just seeing the Green Dragon in Quagmire's Cave. We actually now see the Golem guarding Catelyn, which is pretty cool as well. And finally, the last thing I should touch up on is quick saving. This is a brand new feature here. By simply pressing the start button, the game will let you quick save and it'll boot you back to the title screen just so you can pick it up another time, which is very nice right there. Doesn't mean you need to haul ass all the way back to the castle, which is amazing. But overall, aside from quick saving, which is the biggest feature in the brand new intro sequence and some small changes, it's pretty similar to the Super Famicom version. You can either pick either or. If you just want everything to be done by a press of a button, go with the Game Boy version. If you want better graphics, go with the Super Famicom version. But we still have one final version to take a look at, and that's the mobile version. In 2004, a mobile version was made for Dragon Quest, for mobile devices that were definitely more powerful than a Nokia phone or a Motorola flip phone, as these were exclusive to Japan. Tosley was brought on once again to work on this version right here, and later brought on again to bring it to iOS and Android was the smartphone boom. And in 2014, the smartphone release saw a worldwide release all over the world, and fun fact, this was the first time ever that Europeans got a taste of Dragon Quest 1. As they never experienced it before. The first Dragon Quest experience was Dragon Quest 8. And to quickly touch on this is indeed the official localization from Square Enix that I've been using their terminology for throughout this video, other than some certain spells and such. But yeah, when it comes down to this localization, it uses the old English from the NES version, while menus are still in regular English. And when you enter Erdrick's cave and read Erdrick's tombstone, Erdrick doesn't actually speak in Old English, he actually speaks in normal English, which kind of foreshadows a lot of things. Specifically when I was taking a look at this version here, I was playing this via BlueStacks, which is essentially an Android emulator to play Dragon Quest 1 mobile. And also I did record a little bit of Switch footage, just so we can compare and contrast. So from the top, once again, all the quality of life improvements from the Super Famicom remake are here and present in the mobile release. Though when it comes down to certain things, there are some upgrades and downgrades, more so when you compare it to the Game Boy Color version. So let's start with the upgrades. Graphically, this is the best looking version of Dragon Quest 1 here. Though debatably, you can argue that certain graphic effects that were found in the Super Famicom version, like the shadows and coal, are no longer present here in Dragon Quest for mobile, which is a little bit unfortunate, but I think sprites-wise, it's definitely better looking compared to the Super Famicom version. The music, on the other hand, uses the current MIDI renditions of these songs that have normally been used in spin-off games and promotion for Dragon Quest. And when it comes down to it, they're fine. Nothing too special when it comes down to these MIDIs here. Nor are they fantastic or anything like that. I think they're fine. Like the Game Boy Color version, the quick command system is still the default way of interacting with things in the world. But seeing how we're working on a mobile device that only has a touchscreen, the game was reworked to be more palpable to a touchscreen. And it actually works. I actually do like playing it through the mobile phone, seeing how they worked the game to work on portrait mode, and it was definitely reworked to be more intuitive with that design there. Most mobile games, when it comes down to it, work best when playing in portrait mode. Quick saving from the Game Boy version also makes a return, and unlike before where when you quick save and the game kicks you out, here in the mobile release, when you quick save you can still play on, essentially meaning that you just have an extra buffer. And on top of this, you also have auto saving. Every time you win a battle or leave town or enter a cave, the game will indeed autosave. And fun fact, you can actually abuse this system right here. If you go on and die, you can quickly exit out the game and the game will just autosave from the last battle you won or the last town you exited from. Neat trick if you want to try it out. And finally, one thing I've been waiting is an in-game map. Yeah, I never mentioned an in-game map in the other remakes because they never include it. While here in the mobile release, there's an in-game map, which makes this much more easier for first-time players to get into. But now we talk about the downgrades. Well, this comes down to kind of just the nice little touch-ups that the previous versions had. You remember those nice sprites that you had for keyed items and all? Those are all gone. And instead, it's pretty similar to how the NES version handled key items when you found them. Just stuck in the chest. Nothing more, nothing less, which sucks. And besides quick saving, all the nice features like the nice intro, the golem that's in Can't Lin, that's gone as well. And even though I do prefer the mobile release compared to the other versions out there, mostly just because of the official localization and all, it is kind of boring to play through this version because it's kind of just a run-of-the-mill port of Dragon Quest I. And the last thing I need to mention is, of course, the Switch version. Of course, this is a mobile version being brought over to Nintendo Switch, and yeah, you can obviously tell, as for whatever reason, the game has this weird shimmering when you're moving across the screen, as if it was not integrated well for a 16:9 presentation, and there's this weird graphic smoothing filter on sprites, and it just doesn't look that good. It's very comparable when you compare it to Final Fantasy VI on mobile and PC. Thank God for that pixel remaster. But ultimately, when it comes down to it, despite my issues I have with the mobile release, which are generally just mostly nitpicks, I would say the mobile version is the best way to play because it's the most accessible version for anyone to try out. Number one, it's the cheapest option, and two, everyone has a smartphone, and most people are going to have a modern console like a Nintendo Switch. But unless you emulate it, won't judge about that. And that was Dragon Quest I and its multiple versions that we took a look at. Sure, we didn't take a look at that MSX version or the PS4 version or the 3DS version. I think we got the gist of Dragon Quest overall. And how do I feel about it? Well, for one, it's definitely aged. Definitely with the fact that there's a lot of grinding you need to do in the game. Some cryptic things like manually selecting the stairs to go down. All that is definitely cryptic, but the more I think about this game, the more I think it's not that bad of a game. Like I said, sure, it's aged. There's certain things I like about it. I like the fact that the game doesn't hold your hand, and it expects you to go on and ask for directions. And unlike Zelda, where none of the people told you where to go next, Dragon Quest, they actually tell you good directions of where you need to go. And I respect Dragon Quest for that. And this is definitely a game that you want to play multiple times. This is not a game you just play once and be done with it. No, the game encourages you to go on and play again and try different ways of playing through the game. On my second playthrough, I was actually surprised that I remember a lot about this game. I remembered where this area was, or that area, or where to find the Sunstone or the Staff of Rain. It was definitely all memorable to me, and that's something I can appreciate for a game, that something sticks into your mind and you just remember a lot about a game. And for sure, the NES version is definitely very archaic when it comes down to its design. And of course, I would rather play the remakes over the original NES version just because of accessibility and the quality of life features. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the original NES version is a bad game, because at the core, it's relatively well designed and was definitely well thought out about how they wanted to design this game. And of course, when it comes down to my recommendation, I would definitely recommend the remakes, of course, rather than the NES version. But at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, even though Dragon Quest is not a great game or anything, I still think it's a very inspirational game, a very revolutionary game, one would say, because this was the start of JRPGs on home consoles. And for that, that gets a lot of my respect. Catch you guys next time.